Well, we are in this infamous chapter of Genesis 27. This is where Jacob steals Esau's blessing. He'd already, as Esau says, stolen his birthright. That wasn't exactly stealing, although the price demanded for the bull, we all would call it something like highway robbery. It was theft in that sense. It was outrageous what he demanded, and it's more outrageous what Esau was willing to give up. But here we have outright theft. It seems to be the one thing that Esau could have gotten from his parents that he was not despising. This is actually something he would have liked to have gotten. But of course it was taken from him, and there was no reconsideration that was made later. We'll get to that in the weeks ahead. But we come here, this is our third message on this story. Today we'll be considering verses 18 through 29. It's a pivotal section. This is the section of the story where the birthright actually is stolen. So the whole story is about the events leading up to this and the fallout of this, and this is kind of this hinge in the story where the actual deed takes place. And so it's kind of the climax, the height of the tension is here. You could imagine being Jacob as you walk into your blind father's tent and he says, "Who are you?" And it just begins to get worse. Sentence by sentence, phrase by phrase, there's more at stake, there's more risk, and the lies are compounded, and he just keeps asking. He won't leave this thing, but finally you succeed, and you have duped him, and you got what you wanted. And of course, as we'll see, it doesn't turn out anyway. For all of his deception, for all of his lies, he's left to flee from home with nothing but a staff. For all the birthright that he got and all the blessing, he's left with nothing but a staff and a rock for a pillow before it's all over. But this is then this third section of the story. The first section we considered was with Isaac and his own plotting and scheming to bless his son and to kind of subvert what he knew God desired. The second section was about Rebekah and her plotting and scheming and convincing Jacob to go through with her desire, to fulfill her desire and obey her voice and trick and deceive his father, her husband, to steal the birthright or the blessing from his brother, her son, her other son, her less favored son. So when we consider this and what we're going to see today, I would say this: it shocks the conscience to think that anyone would ever stoop this low. And truthfully, I would say to think that someone would do this only just, at least for me, amazes me with how rightly Jacob was named. I mean, this is amazing. This guy, you remember his name means essentially a deceiver and a supplanter, one who usurps your position. You have something rightfully yours, and he takes it for himself in an underhanded way. That's the nature of what his name means, and that's exactly what we have here. We will see Jacob in this story for what he is, and we will also consider the message today, the great need for God's grace in his life, and we will also consider the great need for God's grace and God's intervention, which will be necessary in order that God's promises to Abraham and Isaac would ever come to pass. Because of the things that happen here, it just makes it all the more necessary for God to be extremely gracious and to overlook these sins if He's ever actually going to bring about what He promised He would bring about. First thing, though, I want to do is to review the story up to this point, and then we will read the section today and dive in. So, just to review, let's first remember that Esau has already demonstrated that he's not fit to receive the Abrahamic blessing. You remember God had already made a choice and made it known that Esau would be servant to his younger brother Jacob. We know that. We saw that Esau had sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. He thoroughly demonstrated that he despised his birthright when he did that, which is a very big thing for a descendant of Abraham to do, right? There were so many promises from God connected with Abraham's line, and Esau just dismissed it all. It's incredible. Think of you familiar with, there's that phrase, the title for this guy, the artist formerly known as Prince, right? He had this title as Prince, and he gave that up, wanted to be something else. That kind of happened in history. It kind of happened in recent history with Prince Harry, kind of advocating some things that he had. But there was another prince who did this as well, Prince Edward VIII, this last century, who abdicated his right to become King of England in order that he might marry an American woman, right? That's why we have Queen Elizabeth. I mean, that's how she became queen. And this is an amazing thing. You think that he could have been king, and he just forsook all that to marry this gal, you know. And some of you might think that's romantic. I tend to think that's rather foolish. But nonetheless, it's the same kind of thing. You just turned your nose at all of this that was meant for you and was yours by your birthright. This belongs to you. And you just dismiss it. And this is what Esau did. Esau turns away. I mean, it's bad enough to say, you know, I don't care if I'm king or not. But to say, I don't care about all these things that God has done in my father and my grandfather's life, and all that he's promised and all that he's committed to do in this family. Say, I don't really need any part in that. That's amazing. And he did that for a bowl of soup. So quite a thing here. The other way that Esau demonstrated his unfitness for receiving the Abrahamic blessing is his marriage to these two Hittite women, and the bitterness of spirit that they brought to Rebekah, and also even to Isaac, you know, who loved him. And Isaac, you know, when Isaac considers Esau and his wives that he's married, it's hard. It's hard to think about. It's hard to swallow. Turns his stomach, makes him uneasy, keeps him up at night. Always putting out fires. It's a mess. And so they've made his life bitter. And so for all these reasons, Esau has shown thoroughly that he's not fit for the blessing. And this is what we see worked out as well by the end of things here. We haven't gotten in our story in Genesis 27 to Esau's failures and his problems, but we'll get there in time. Let's also remember, as we think about reviewing, that Isaac had made a choice here concerning the timing of things. His health is declining, and he's determined, look, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around. I need to set things in order. I want to make sure that Esau is set up the way I want him to. He's the one I really love, and so, this is what I'm going to do. And so he seeks to make up for Esau's lost birthright and to soften the fate that God had decreed for Esau when God said the older will serve the younger. He wants to kind of make that not so bad. And so he seeks to bless his favorite son with earthly prosperity, with family dominance, political success, divine protection, and at least to pump the brakes on the fate that God said would be his when he would be serving his younger brother. It's quite a thing, and he is kind of really at odds with God in this. It's not out and out defiance, but it's really close. It's kind of that time when you tell your child to do something and they say, okay, and they just sit there, and you're kind of, come on. Look, I've told you, I'm going to tell you again, and they're just not really serious about obeying, and this is kind of the way it is here with Isaac. He understands God has decreed certain things, and he knows he's not really going to go against that necessarily. He can't overcome that, but he's going to do everything he can to make it not that bad for Esau. How close can I get to disobedience without disobedience is kind of the idea. And of course, that we all know that never works. Anybody who finds himself asking that question is already in defiance. And that works out in his own life, and the way he is relating to his wife, the way he's favoring one son over another, and the way he sets himself really at odds in his heart against the Lord and God's will here. The third thing to remember here as we come into our passage today is that these events that are going to take place in this tent are official business. Right? These things are official. They are socially and religiously, they are official. They carry weight. It can't be just undone because you just said, oh, well, I didn't realize. Like, this is official stuff. You signed the contract. The notary public was there. It's all done. It's been filed with the court. This is official. There's no changing it now. And this is the way it is in that tent and the things that will take place here. So there's a lot at stake. And could you imagine, someone going to a courtroom of a blind judge and trying to fool the judge? This is kind of what's happening. I know, I'm that guy. Oh, wait a minute, are you sure? He's reading the Braille, what's your birth date? And you're like, what's my birthday? When somebody tells you, like, it's this date. That's right. And this kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that's happening. The stakes are high. We're playing a very dangerous, high-risk game of deception with your blind father. It's awful. So here's where we are. Now, remember also, I won't go into all this, but remember I talked about how Isaac's sins are kind of layered one upon the other, one sin leading to the next. We have favoritism, or we have his appetite, and his lustful appetite, he's kind of lack of self-control there leads to favoritism, leads to division in his family with his wife, and that situation where he's continually growing comfortable, being at odds with those he's in a close relationship with, where his will is against their will and they're at odds. He gets real comfortable with that, and he gets to the place where he is very comfortable, almost unaware of how bad it is that he's acting out in such a way as to set his will against God's. And he somehow thinks that God's going to dishonor this. And so things were getting worse for him. Last week we considered the next section of the story and Rebekah's major part in this whole debacle. We saw that this plan to steal the blessing from Esau, her oldest son, was her idea. This is the kind of thing that, one child has something coming their way and another child steals it. You never expect the mother to be behind it. You expect her to put an end to it. To figure out, to sort through what was going on and say, whoa, wait a minute. Don't treat your brother that way. Instead, this is her idea. And she's telling her favorite son, obey me. Do what I'm telling you to do. I'm insisting that you do this. He says, well, what about if we get caught? I'll take care of that. Well, what happens if we really what happens if nothing works and we all get found out? I'll take all the consequences. Don't worry. I'll own up to it. It's incredible. And so with her, it's just amazing to think about. She has this sin of favoritism of one child, leads to division with her husband, leads to a willingness to deceive him in order to secure her own desires. Also resulted in an unchecked resentment toward Esau for the misery he had brought into her life due to his poor choices and his worldly pursuits and his pagan wives. Taking the birthright from Esau in order to give it to Jacob is not a tall hurdle for her emotionally. That's incredible. It's just not really when she hears this is going to happen, she immediately runs off and enacts this plan. It wasn't just she bemoaned the choice before her for a long time. She knew exactly what she wanted. And she sprung into action. It was not a tall hurdle for her to try to scheme with her son to steal the birthright from her other son. She pleads with Jacob to follow her plan, and he follows her. And his only momentary hesitation is about what if he gets caught. And she gives him this assurance that she would be willing to take the fall for it if they get caught. So together they begin to carry out this plan to deceive Isaac and to rob Esau of whatever blessing Isaac intends to give him. And all of that brings us then to our new material for today. So as we begin, let's read verses 18 through 29, and then we will begin to work through it. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found us so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." And then Isaac said to Jacob, Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father. And you might say went trembling, this is the way it is. Who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, are you really my son Esau? And he answered, I am. Then he said, bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, and this was intended then for Esau, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. All right, that's the section of the account today. As we begin to work through, let me first indicate for you, I think something that will be helpful, and that is the structure of this section. It's a very clear structure. It proceeds in two cycles that repeat themselves. Okay, so let me give you the very basic of it, and then we'll go through it in a little bit more detail, and then the third time we'll actually work through all the verses and everything that we see. So, 2 rounds of events. Each round includes the following actions by Isaac, all of which are responded to deceitfully by Jacob. Okay? So, or maybe 3 actions by Isaac and then a conclusion. All those actions are responded to deceitfully by Jacob. And then that's all repeated. So the first, and this is repeated, Isaac questions his son's identity verbally. Who are you? That happens first. Second, he's lied to about who he is. Then he says, then Isaac investigates about his son using the food as an instrument. Like, what about the food? That happens. There's some investigation concerning the food. Third, and he's deceived on that. Third, Isaac investigates about his son concerning his son's physical body. And he's deceived and lied to about that. And then at the end of each of these cycles, the first cycle, it says, he's kind of determines, he makes a decision to go ahead and move forward to bless his son, whom he believes to be Esau. He decides, okay, I'm satisfied for now. And then the last time through, he's satisfied and actually does bless him. So it's the same cycle that's repeated both times. So, or I guess that happens the first time and is repeated the second time. How about that? So let's go through that one more time a little bit more thoroughly so that we see it in the passage before we work our way through all this in detail. So first of all, Isaac questions his son's identity and whether it was Esau. He says in verse 18, so he went into his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, he lies to him, I am Esau, your firstborn. So who are you? So that's the first question. And it's answered by Jacob with a lie, claiming to be his brother Esau. Following that, then we have this attempted investigation concerning the food and whether it was the wild game meal that he had requested from Esau. What does he say? He says, verse 20, but Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? Right? You shouldn't be back so soon. This is really fast. Like this is a record time for you to have gone out hunting, gone out to wherever you're going to hunt, found your prey, killed it, cleaned it, brought it back, and then prepared the meal and brought it here. How is this possible? So he investigates concerning the meal. And Jacob passes the investigation. He succeeds in working through the investigation by answering with a lie. And here he invokes the name of God in his lie. And he also claims that God is not even his own God, but just his father's God. At least he's honest on that point. All right? So he passes. Then you have next, Isaac will attempt another investigation, this time concerning the physical body belonging to the person in his tent. He says, where are we at here? In verse 21, Then Isaac said to Jacob, Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. Now, this is amazing. He doesn't have it in his head, I wonder if you're Esau or not. Son, why don't you come here? He says, why don't you come here so I can feel you to see whether you are Esau or not? That would be terrifying if you're Jacob. I mean, it's like, he's on to me. This is really bad, right? But so this is what he says. It's a test. He's really uncertain here. And so Jacob passes again by deceiving his father, using the disguise his mother made for him. And as much as we might say, that's crazy. It was, the skin of goats or whatever. But it says in verse 23, he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. Whatever they did, it was like Esau. So it worked. You couldn't tell the difference. If you had felt Esau's arms in his hands, as evidently gross as that would be, you have done that enough times, you know what this man feels like, and when you feel Jacob's disguise, it's spot on. That's exactly what he feels like. And so there it is. So it says in verse 23, so he blessed him. Now that's not a chronological statement. The point is there, so he determined to bless him. Like, so he blessed him. You think, well, where's the blessing? Well, the blessing isn't until later. The point here is, when it says he blessed him, is he's kind of wavering back and forth. He wasn't really sure. He did some investigation. He thinks, okay. And then it's immediately followed up. He says, are you really my son Esau? He asks him again this question. Are you really Esau? Right? This second cycle. Wait a minute. Are you Esau or not? And Jacob answers again with a lie, claiming to be his brother Esau. Now we have a second attempted investigation concerning the food and whether it was the wild game meal requested of Esau. What does he say? Well, then bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. I mean, because he makes it a certain way, so bring it near and let's try it. And and it's good. It's what he wanted. So Jacob passes by deceiving his father with the food that was given to him by his mother. And then there's another attempted investigation concerning the second attempted investigation concerning the physical body belonging to the person. This time he doesn't say, come near to me that I might smell you. But that's why he does it. And he says, his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. There's one other person in the scriptures that we know was betrayed with a kiss, the Lord Jesus. Well, here it's Isaac. Come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him. So Jacob passes again by deceiving his father, again using the physical disguise his mother stole from his brother Esau. And Isaac then concludes his investigation by moving forward to bless the person that he believes to be Esau. And so you see these two cycles. It's the same kind of events. They're ratcheted up in their intensity. They're very thorough. Whatever you might be tempted to read this story and think, Isaac is a total fool. How could he be duped like this? Look, he's only got 4 of his 5 senses and he deploys them all. And he's left with the conclusion, this must be Esau. He does what he can. So this is where we are. So that's the structure. Now then, let's look in then at these verses one at a time, or a section at a time. Verse 18, so he went in to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. So again, Isaac questions his son identity verbally. Right, he goes in, so here's Isaac in the tent, and he just hears someone say, my father. And he's thinking, this sounds kind of like Jacob. Now we know initially he thinks it sounds like Jacob because it tells us a few verses later, in verse 22, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So you need to understand at the outset, he's thinking, I was expecting Esau, not this soon, but this sounds like Jacob. Well, what does Jacob want? So he says, who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. So Isaac's initial response is warm and sincere. We see that phrase again, here I am, and I've talked to you guys about that in the past, where that phrase, when someone calls for you and you say, here I am, in the Old Testament, that was a way of kind of just saying, I'm at your disposal. What would you want? Whatever you ask, I'm ready to obey. I'm ready to answer your questions, or whatever it is you want, I'm here and available for you. And this is the way Isaac answers. It all makes this deception all the worse. Like Jacob comes in and says, my father. Isaac hears Jacob's voice and says, son, what do you need? Now, we know there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but he's kind of willing. What does my son need? I'll do what I can for him. And his son just lies to him. I'm Esau, your firstborn. Jacob answers him falsely. I'm Esau, your firstborn. He then also adds that he has been obedient. Right? I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. I'm your obedient son. Really? So he's laying it on pretty thick. I've done just as you told me. Right? I've carried out all your wishes, Father. And as a result, I'm seeking the blessing that you've promised me. With all your soul. Get ready to do what you want to do. Here it is. Lay it on me. So, this is how he answers this deceit. But Isaac says to his son, there's a problem with your story, boy. Right? There's a problem. How could you have gotten it so quickly, my son? How could you have done that? And what does he say? It was a miracle. That's what he says. It was a miracle. Isn't that what he says, essentially? Because the Lord your God granted me success. God's in it. That's what it is. God is for me. God wants you to give me this. He knows what you're wanting to do. He knows how bad I need it. And God is approving. And He worked a miracle. It was a miracle, God. Dad, that's what it was. I know it seems unlikely. I know it seems you caught me. But I'm telling you, it was a miracle. Right? This is the way it is. I won't mention the comedian's name because of what he's associated with now, but there was a comedian one time I heard sharing, this was years ago, and he was talking about being sick and faking so he didn't have to go to school. Right? And then his mom would say, okay, you can stay home. He just like, you go out there like he was just miserable. And then later in the day, he'd say, Mom, a miracle happened. I'm well. And she's like, no, you're not well. Get back into bed. He says, no, an angel came and made me well. And he's like, I knew she had to believe the angel. What was she going to do? Well, that's ridiculous. But it's the same kind of thing. Here he is, right? Here's Jacob. He says, well, it was a miracle. I mean, I don't have to explain it. I mean, you would think he might say, well, when I went down into that valley, there was this doe jumped right across and hit the story. He just says, no, it was a miracle. God gave me success. God just was with me. What a thing. Isn't this always the way with liars? I mean, they always kind of go far. They tell a lie more than they should have, more than they needed to. They want to convince you, so they lay it on thick, and you can usually just see it. It's not long. And if you don't see it initially, just keep waiting. You'll see it. And this is the way it is. So, it was a miracle. He says, the Lord your God granted me success. So Isaac is here. He's uneasy about the situation. It seems as though there's not been enough time that's passed since his earlier conversation with Esau when he made the request. And he's got this voice that it doesn't really seem to be the same voice. Maybe it doesn't sound exactly like Jacob, but it sounds more like Jacob than it does like Esau. You would think that Jacob, with all of his scheming, would try to disguise his voice a little bit, make it a little deeper or whatever he's trying to do something to sound more like his brother Esau. But Isaac's not fooled by that. So he's suspicious. And again, as I said, we have 5 senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Isaac only has 4 because he doesn't have sight, because he's blind. So he's got 4 senses. His hearing is telling him that it might be Jacob in the tent. Right? So before he is finished with all this, he will have used all of his other senses in his attempt to discern which son is in the tent with him, concluding that Esau is with him after all. But this first response has to do not with his other senses, but just with his mind. There's a logical problem. There hasn't been enough time. The food has been prepared and made ready in what seems like far too short a period of time. Let's just think about it. Maybe we should normally imagine it might take Esau an hour or so to gather all of his hunting gear and get out to where he normally hunts. Then he's got to, however long it takes him to do the hunting. Then he's got to clean it and he's got to get back. This should be several hours, and then he's got to cook it, and that takes a while because he likes it a certain way. It's got to be real tender. Whatever it is, he likes it a very specific meal that he's requested here. And so, also remember Esau, upon leaving the camp, Rebekah and Jacob hurried off immediately in a rushed fashion to prepare the food as fast as they could so that it would all be over by the time Esau got back. So it just seemed like it was maybe an hour or two too soon for them to have the meal. Maybe he told them this and it was the morning and he was expecting, around 2 o'clock to have a nice, wonderful feast. Or maybe it was noontime and he was thinking something for dinner. Whatever it may be. But it was ready far sooner than he was planning. And it's a real shock. So it just seems like it's been too soon. Now, again, consider Jacob's response. Because the Lord your God granted me success. Two major things to point out here. First, he uses the Lord's name to lend credibility and believability to his lie. Right? This is what he does. This is a real evil. Think of this. I don't know if you've ever had your name brought into someone else's lie, but it's infuriating. Like if someone else has ever used you kind of in their lie, you know that you're not associated with the lie at all, and yet your good name and reputation that you have with someone is being used against that person to deceive them. Right? It would be like, one of my children telling the other children, do this. They say, no. Well, Mom and Dad said, and Mom and Dad didn't say. Right? That's like a level of beyond. Right? And this is what we mean. It says, well, God gave me success. And you can imagine God saying, I've got nothing to do with your little scheme here. Don't drag me into this. Don't put me over here on your side in this whole thing. This is your deception. But you see, Isaac has a history with God. Isaac himself is a child of promise. He never should have been born. He's a miracle baby, right? He himself, when he got married, was married to a woman who was barren. And for 20 years, he sought God to overcome that. And God did with these two boys. These two boys are miracle children. And so, it's like Jacob knows that Isaac's going to believe that God might do something like this, that God would act in ways that are surprising and unusual. In other words, Isaac believes in miracles. And so he plays on that, and he says, look, it must have been a miracle from God. God has in the past overcome all kinds of obstacles, bigger things than this, to be good to you. Why wouldn't he do that now? Right? God's just being so good to you, Dad, while he attempts to steal and to deceive his father. What a thing. So God's track record of blessing in unexpected ways is used by Jacob as a cover for his deceit, which makes it all the worse. The second thing to notice is he identifies the Lord not as his own God, but as the God of his father. The Lord your God granted me success. Now you might say, well, Chad, maybe you're reading a little bit too much into that. He could just be, reminding Isaac maybe how good God has been to him all these years. The Lord your God, the one that you've served all these years, the one that's been so faithful to you. That's the one. He's doing it again, Dad. He's certainly telling him that, but he's also distancing himself from God here. I don't think in a deliberate fashion. I think it's just the case that this 77-year-old man had not yet made God his God. He'd not yet bowed the knee. And I'll say that, I think it's very consistent language used by him. And one of the things I want to point to in the very next chapter, chapter 28, is for you to look at chapter 28, verses 20 through 22, and read these verses with me. I don't think I'll need to read anything else. If you read this text with me, you'll see this, and then just take my word for it. I've looked at all the other places where Jacob refers to God, and it's consistent with this language. So Genesis 28, 20 through 22. Then Jacob made a vow. This is when he's getting ready to leave. He's running from Esau, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord, or then Yahweh, shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. You see that? So he's at this point, even when he's, a little while later, when he's fleeing for his life, he's saying, if you do these things for me, then I'll let you be my God. Right? And so it's consistent at this point for him to say, the Lord your God. And I'm just wanting to point out that even though that's honest, but that's awful. Like to think that you have grown up in Isaac's home and you haven't served God, you haven't bowed the knee to God, you're an old man now and you're not even walking with God. This is incredible. It's incredible to think how low the things are, the condition is in the family of the chosen line. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob we always think about. Oh, these great patriarchs. We got Abraham, we got Isaac, and Isaac's boys, they're 77 years old, and neither one of them are walking with God at all. This is crazy. How could it have fallen flat so quickly? A 77-year-old man says, well, if God will do all these things for me, then I'll serve Him. But not unless He does those things. It's incredible. So here we are. He says, the Lord your God. Well, some 20 years later, he does come back, and at that point, he does, in fact, build an altar, and the altar he names God. God is, since it's God, the God of Israel is what it's named. And so he's saying, God is my God, and he builds this altar, and he does that. So again, there's something awful about this. How could it be that the Lord was not the God he had chosen to serve already? It's amazing. But he doesn't claim God as his own. He's not living for God. He's not looking to God. Not yet, anyway. Okay, the next little section here, verse 21. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Again, Isaac is still uneasy about all this, and so he investigates concerning the physical body of his son, since the two boys we know have very different bodies. One was a smooth man, one was this hairy man. So he requests that Jacob come near, specifically so that he may feel him, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. And as I said, those words would have just been terrifying. Right? I mean, he told his mom, well, what if he comes near and he touches me, and then, she says, well, we've got this disguise for that. He goes in there, and then he says, come near, let me feel you to see whether you're Esau or not. He just doubts it entirely. And, someone telling a lie, and they're specifically addressed on the lie, like, let's see if that's really the case. He's got to be squirming. And like I said, I can't imagine he's not coming in here just trembling just about. So Isaac goes so far even as to express his doubts, right? To see whether you are really my son Esau or not. His fear of being deceived is real. Think of that. I mean, he thinks he hears Jacob's voice and he's like, here he goes, he's at it again. This might be Jacob. Come here. Let me feel you. When Jacob said, I'm Esau, he didn't just believe it. He assumed, his assumption here, his operating assumption is it's just as likely to be Jacob lying to him as it is to be Esau telling the truth. That's his conclusion, so he wants to investigate. Come here, let me feel you. What a thing. I mean, it's Jacob has his reputation not just because of stealing the birthright, not just because of what he's attempting here. Evidently, this is just the way he's been. 77 years on, and it's never been any different for Jacob. He's always been this kind of guy. I'm Esau, and you think, I don't know. So, here he is. He finds success with this disguise. Isaac buys it, believing that the hands and the arms he feels certainly do belong to Esau. And we see Isaac again expressing his dilemma here, that he is concerned with that something may be afoot. But of his 4 senses, he now has 2 which are conflicting. He hears Jacob, but he feels Esau. He's not sure what to make of it. But he says, verse 23, he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. So he determines he's going to go. The disguise worked well enough to decrease Isaac's level of worry and fear, so he goes ahead and proceeds with this idea of blessing. But it doesn't last long. The doubt still plagues him in the next verse, 24. Are you really my son Esau? And he answers, I am. So Jacob lies again, but surely this time with fear about what might be the next test of his identity. No, I am. Just take my word, please. Don't ask any more questions and let's just get this done. Please. Verse 25, then he said, well, bring it near to me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. And you can imagine, here's Jacob thinking, I hope she put that one seasoning and I hope she remembered to put the extra salt in or whatever it might be. Did she cook it long enough? We were really hurrying. I hope Mom knows what she's doing. She did. Like I said, she's very likely the one who taught Esau how to make that game that certain way. Maybe not, but she knew what she was doing. We generally think of Isaac as being the cook, but it was Esau who was the cook. So here it is. Isaac again seeks to investigate his son's identity by considering the food he requested from Esau. This is not a dish that Isaac makes or makes well. If the dish is as expected, then it's not from Jacob. Right? This is the test. If this tastes like what Esau makes, then that's Esau. If it tastes like not that, then it's Jacob. And his taste now tells him, his sense of taste now tells him, this is Esau. So his touch and his taste say Esau. His hearing says probably Jacob. But 2 out of 3 now are telling him this is Esau. Right? He eats the food. It's just the way he likes it. Then Jacob brings him wine, it says. And he drank. And you wonder if it was strong drink. Like it might have just been wine. It's an alcoholic beverage. That's what he wants. It's the wine. It's what they drink. But there's also such a thing that they've got as strong drink. That's kind of a little more. And you wonder if he brings them the hard liquor, just to kind of make things go a little easier, a little smoother for the rest of the time. I don't know. I will say this. It takes longer than these few sentences to eat this meal. So you ought not think that this is that this all happens as fast as we read it. He eats the whole meal. What do they talk about while he's eating? Or do they sit in silence? You just wonder. We're kind of just getting the high points, the turning points in the narrative, the things that build the tension and show us how bad it got and to what lengths Jacob had to go and how uncertain Isaac was and how thorough he attempted to be in his investigation as to who this was. That's all we really get because that's all we need to know. But you can be sure there was a lot more going on in this tent at the time. So he eats it and then why don't you have a little alcohol, Dad? Enjoy. I think that's part of it. It may not be because at these meals, what else would you drink but wine? That was the better drink. So it may just be that. Jacob's too crafty for that is what I think. I think he's just smarter than that. Stupid, but smart, right? What is he doing? But he's crafty. And so I think it's probably something to help grease the wheels, so to speak, here. So this would help his cause. It doesn't have to be that, but I think it may help his cause. Then verse 26, what do we read? Then his father Isaac said to him, another test, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him. And he didn't want to kiss. I mean, he wanted to kiss, but that wasn't really it. He goes to kiss him and you imagine, I mean, here's Jacob. He's like, what are you doing? Like, what? Right? I mean, you ever had somebody do that? We've got memes about that, about a certain presidential candidate right now. It's weird. Like, you don't just go smelling people, right? This is weird stuff. And this is what he does. Right? I mean, how many have you ever had someone give you a hug and just... You do it, he's got a reason for it. But you know it's got to make Jacob uncomfortable. I mean, it's like, we're to the end. He's eating the meal. We're almost done. And he's like, Dad's still acting all weird, like he doesn't really believe. He's not 100% sure. And he wasn't. Now he smells him. And it smells like Esau. It smells like the clothes that he wears, the good clothes that he wears when he goes out usually and does this thing. It smells like a field that the Lord has blessed. That's what it smells like to me. That's what he says. See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. This other investigation. So now he's got all of of the 4 senses he has left, 3 of them are saying this is Esau. And the only one that's saying it's probably Jacob is what he hears, the voice. It just doesn't quite sound like Esau's voice. It sounds a little more like Jacob. So, with 3 of the 4 telling him it's Esau, the ruse has worked, and he blesses. See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed, and he begins to bless. May God give you of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine, which I think up till then means earthly prosperity. I mean, you're going to have what? Of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. You're going to be rich. You're going to have everything you want. It's all yours. A wealthy man. That's what I desired God to do for you. May God give you these things. And what else do we want from God? He says, let peoples, plural, serve you, and nations bow down to you. Right? Political success. Peoples and nations are serving and bowing down to you. What a blessing. I mean, that's quite a thing. Be a nice thing to have in your back pocket. Everyone's going to just serve you. You're going to rule politically. Also, family dominance, which was not supposed to be. This was supposed to belong to Jacob, not to Esau. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. And what else? Divine protection. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. So these things. Quite a blessing. It's a strong blessing. It's an amazing blessing. It's a greater blessing than most people would give to their children. But it's not the Abrahamic blessing. That was reserved, we saw before, that is reserved for Jacob, for when Isaac knows he's blessing Jacob. That comes in chapter 28. But everything he could give to him, he seeks to give to him. Now, so it works. He gets all these things in terms of the blessing from his father. He stole the blessing. He succeeded. That's as far as we're going to get today. So I want to conclude the message today, kind of 2 things left to do. One, I want to talk again about the sins of Jacob and his need of God's grace. And then we're going to close with seeing just how dependent all these promises of God are now upon God's grace alone. And we're just going to keep seeing that again and again. So first of all, when I consider the sins of Jacob and his need for God's grace, I mean, I hope that as we've gone through here, none of us think that Jacob is a model of godliness, or he's a likely candidate to have his name changed to Israel, Prince of God, right? Or that this would be the one who's the father of the nations, that the nation that God would choose would be named after this man. Surely not. Let's just consider some of his sins. First of all, we could say the sin of godlessness. May the Lord your God. He's godless, right? He's an ungodly man. Romans 1:18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. He's not a candidate for God's favor here as we would think of it. I mean, he is ungodly. He's a 77-year-old man who's grown up in the only house, perhaps in the world, but at least in the area, that knows God and that serves God. And he's got no desire to follow God himself. He's godless. It's incredible. He needs God's grace. God would be perfectly just to condemn this man on a number of levels. What else? How about pride and selfishness? James 4:6 says God opposes the proud. Right? He opposes the proud. Philippians 2, do nothing from rivalry or conceit. Well, that's all he ever did. He saw his older brother as a rival, and all he ever did was just compete and try to vie to get the better thing for himself. This was his life. We're told, do nothing from rivalry or conceit. He was a liar. Proverbs 19, verse 9. I'll get there here in a second. Proverbs 19:9. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish. I mean, Jacob is setting himself up here for the wrath of God, right? Everything we see. This is what I want to highlight. I mean, it's not just that he's a sinner. Understand, all these areas of sin rightly deserve the wrath of God. And yet God has said that Jacob would be the one. Jacob is in so much need of God's grace. He's a schemer. Psalm 36, verse 4. Speaking about the wicked, says he plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. This is the wicked man. And the end of that psalm says, let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down, unable to rise. This is what happens to those who plot the way that Jacob's plotting. They fall down, unable to rise. Well, this is this man. This is where he stands. Well, let's look at one other text. You might want to turn here with me to Proverbs chapter 6. Verses 16 through 19. This is a really good text for this, for Jacob's life. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 that are an abomination to him. Here we go. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. It's like the only one he hasn't tried to murder anyone yet. But like all the rest, he's there. So 6 out of 7 he's guilty of. In 1 hour or 2-hour period, whatever it is, he's done 6 of the 7 things that this text says these things the Lord hates. 7 are an abomination to him. He's got 6 of the 7. This is incredible. This guy is storing up wrath for himself. I mean, as much as we've seen negative about Esau, at this point, it's like, Jacob. I mean, maybe God's going to change his mind here. Maybe God will say, no, we'll go with Esau. Or maybe God will say, you know what? Isaac, I'll give you another child. Right? He did that with Abraham. Abraham had Ishmael, and God said, I'm going to give you a different one. I mean, why not do that here? It's almost like God hamstrung himself by picking one of them ahead of time. You know, ahead of time God said it will be Jacob. Well, then Jacob, he screwed it all up. I mean, there's no way it's going to be Jacob. But God said it was going to be Jacob. So what's going to happen? What is God going to do? How's God going to move into his life in grace to change all of this? So this man knows God and loves God and walks with God. This man would be a repenter, a godly man. How is that going to happen? Well, we haven't seen it yet, that's for sure. And this is where we are. Now, we could jump ahead in the story and see all these different things that God does, and we will do that later in the story. We'll do that as we come to these things. But I just want to say God does move into his life, and providentially and directly, to change this man. He floods this man's life with his grace. to change him, and to bring about his promises. But he also does this, and this brings me to this last point, historically, with the people of Israel. They are in the same boat. They are continually failing God, and God is making good on His promises to them, and it requires much grace for God to do that. He doesn't just act with them and give them what they deserve. If He's going to fulfill His promises, He's got to act with grace. He's got to overlook sin. He's got to do these things, which He's unwilling to do, which He only does later because of what? He does two things. One, God acts in two ways. One, the reason God overlooks sin at any time is one of two reasons, at least. One, He's waiting. He has other interests afoot, other things He's concerned with, that if He were to judge now, they would make impossible His desires for other things in the future, other good things. And so He withholds judgment. He doesn't, right? He just withholds it. He doesn't refuse to give it ever. He just withholds it for now. He holds it back, and we're told the wicked are storing up wrath for the day of wrath. It will come, but it's just filling up this container over here, and one day when it's full, it will all be poured out. The other reason is because He's going to punish those sins on His Son, or He has punished those sins on His Son, Jesus Christ, for you. Those are the only two reasons any sinner ever gets away with the sin, with the consequences of their sin, for even a second. It's either God just intends to punish you later, or Christ has already suffered for those sins. So this is the only two options we have. Now, God has His own reasons for why He waits and why He pours out His wrath at later times. And those reasons can vary, but the point is He's just withholding it, He's just holding it back. Or He's already poured it out on Christ. Now, I want to look at a couple texts, and these will just be 4 passages of Scripture, just to consider this working out in the history of Israel, of God looking at a people who are not deserving of His favor, but He promised something to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and so He's in faithfulness to that, He's going to overlook their condition now, and in grace He's going to carry out what He promised. So the first text I want to look at is Deuteronomy chapter 7. Deuteronomy 7, beginning in verse 6. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for His treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set His love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that He swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love Him and keep His commandments to 1,000 generations, and repays to their face those who hate Him by destroying them. So here you have, God is saying, look, historically, the people of Israel, this nation of people, small, insignificant people, slaves in Egypt, God looks upon them now and sets His love on them. Because He already has some love for them. He loves all people. There's a love for them already because He loves them. But also, the reason He sets His love on them in this special way is because He also remembers the covenant that He had made, the promises He had made to Abraham. And for His sake, because He's a God who keeps covenant, is faithful in His covenant making, He will then deliver them and bring them to the land. It's not because they're great, because they're a mighty people that they just are deserving. He looks out and says, who's the best? And I'm going to align myself with them and, give them my favor because they've done, nobody's done really well, but they've done better than the others, and so I'm going to choose them. That is not why God chose them. They were insignificant. They were the least. But He set His love on them now and acted in this way. The story of Exodus is the story of God setting His love on this nation of people. And He did it because what He said to Abraham. So we see that there. 2 chapters later, chapter 9, people of Israel told the same thing again. Verse 6. Starting in verse 4. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, out the other nations who are in the promised land, when God delivers them, he says, don't say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. Don't say that. He says, whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm, and that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Know therefore that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. Remember and do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day you came out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Even at Horeb you provoked the Lord to wrath, and the Lord was so angry with you that he was ready to destroy you. Like, these are the people. So it's like they're going to come in and think, oh, these God's driving them out because of their wickedness. It must be because we're pretty righteous. I mean, we're the favored nation. We're pretty good. He says, don't even think about that. It's just their exceeding wickedness. It's not because you guys are so righteous. You may not be as bad as some of the things they've done, but you guys are rebellious. Ever since I brought you out and sought to do you good and set my love upon you for the sake of Abraham and all that I promised your forefathers, you've been nothing but rebellious. So watch it. Be very careful. I've done all that I've done because of them. This is grace. You're living on my grace, right now. Don't think that you've earned any of this. And so you see it very clearly in this text, that God is working with them because of his promise, and because of their sin, it's got them in a situation where God is having to act so graciously to them to bring any of this about. It's not as though anyone is deserving of this program. And how about Psalm 105? It's a retelling of the history of Israel. Oh, give thanks to the Lord. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him. Sing praises to him. Tell of all his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. Remember his wondrous works that he has done, his miracles, and the judgments he uttered, O offspring of Abraham. O you descendants of Abraham, remember this, his servant, children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. What's the first thing they want to say about God and his faithfulness and his goodness? He remembers his covenant forever. The word that he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant that he made with Abraham, his sworn promise to Abraham, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. And we're going to keep talking now about the wondrous works of God. He says, when they were few in number and of little account, and sojourners in the land, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people, he allowed no one to oppose them. He rebuked kings on their account, saying, touch not my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm. When he summoned a famine on the land and broke all supply of bread, he had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters, his neck was put in a collar of iron, until what he had said came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the people set him free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. And then Israel came to Egypt. Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham, and the Lord made his people very fruitful and made them stronger than their foes. He turned their hearts to hate his people, to deal craftily with his servants. And he sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. And they performed his signs among them and miracles in the land of Ham. He sent darkness and made the land dark. They did not rebel against his words. He turned their waters into blood and caused their fish to die. Their land swarmed with frogs, even in the chambers of their kings. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. He gave them hail for rain and fiery lightning bolts throughout their land. He struck down their vines and fig trees and shattered the trees of their country. He spoke, and the locusts came, young locusts without number, which devoured all the vegetation in their land and ate up the fruit of their ground. He struck down all the firstborn in their land, the firstfruits of all their strength. Then he brought out Israel with silver and gold, and there was none among his tribe who stumbled. Egypt was glad when they departed, for dread of them had fallen upon it. He spread a cloud for a covering and fire to give light by night, and they asked. And he brought quail, and gave them bread from heaven in abundance. He opened the rock, and water gushed out. It flowed through the desert like a river, for he remembered his holy promise. Remember, the people have been rebellious this whole time. He's doing all this. Why? For he remembered his holy promise and Abraham, his servant. So he brought his people out with joy. I mean, they were rebellious. There were times where it says, you provoked the Lord to wrath. So we know during this time God is angry with the people. And yet he can also describe it because now is the time where he's getting to, in partial measure, to fulfill what he promised to Abraham. He's bringing them out with joy. His chosen ones was singing. And he gave them the lands of the nations. And they took possession of the fruit of the people's toil, that they might keep his statutes and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. And you just see his kindness to them and his grace to them. And you think he's doing this thing on the one hand, they are just slapping him away at every chance they get and resisting him, provoking him to wrath. On the other hand, it's such a joyful time for him. This is how the Lord can describe this at times as a honeymoon. And it's like a honeymoon, like what kind of honeymoon is this? You constantly at each other the whole time. That's not a good honeymoon. I mean, maybe you have an argument or two or something, but like this is constant. He's going to give them the rules like hey, we started out now, I want to give you some laws that I want you to keep. And they're already out there making false gods. It's crazy. But he remembered Abraham and this promise that he had made. And so he brings them out with joy. You see that here. The last text to consider here is just Romans chapter 4. And we'll close with this. Romans chapter 4. I'll start in verse 13. I don't know exactly how far we read. It won't be too long. But for the promise to Abraham and his offspring, verse 13, that he would be heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. Right? God wasn't dealing with him on the basis of things he earned under the law, but rather he believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. He's dealing with him on the basis of grace. For if it is the adherents of the law who were to be the heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. What's the point of God promising it to you if you have to earn it? Right? For the law brings wrath. But where there is no law, there is no transgression. I mean, God can promise it all he wants, but if he makes it conditional upon all of our obedience, it's never going to happen because when people get in relationship to God with law in between, you've got to do all these things and God will approve you, nobody ever passes. It never works. I mean, even the patriarchs, we think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we think great things. And look at their lives that we've seen. I mean, there are failings too many to number. There are some high points to be sure, but it's not all roses. Nobody earns anything from God but sin. The wages of sin is death. Right? So here the law brings wrath, but where there's no law, there's no transgression. If God is going to bring us all that he's promised on the basis of righteousness through faith and grace, then we don't need to worry about it. It can come. He says, verse 16, that is why it does depend on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring. Right, the only way this promise will come to pass is if God sets it on if this thing, it's got to stand somehow. It's got to have some ground to stand on. You could stand it on law, and we might think, yeah, the law, the Ten Commandments, it's solid, the everlasting, eternal law of God. That's a solid foundation to set these promises on. The problem is everyone is broken upon those stones. We all stumble in many ways. Nobody's ever going to earn up to it. So if instead he sets it on this foundation of grace, which we might think, well, God's patience might wear out, his grace might come to an end. Well, not God. God's not that way. He sets it on a foundation of his grace, and it stands forever, sure and certain, guaranteed to all those who will inherit the promise. What a thing. Guaranteed to all of Abraham's offspring. How? Set it on a foundation of grace, and then it will be guaranteed. Now that foundation of grace involves Jesus going to the cross for you, rising again, willing to be your intercessor, willing to put up with all your failings. Like, it depends on that, on God's constant supply of grace. But that's what makes it certain and sure. Like, apart from that, it's never going to come to pass. If there was anything that God had promised Abraham that depended on Abraham's performance, absolutely, or on Isaac's, or on Jacob's, it would have never come to pass. Now, there were things he said, like, these things need to happen for this to come about, and then he worked in their life to make it happen. But it was never as though God stepped back and said, let's see how you do. You passed all these tests, and then we can do something. It wasn't as though God said, here's steps A through Z. Let me know when you finished, and we'll continue. That's not how this worked. I mean, Abraham needed to be a man of faith. He needed to be the kind of guy that would be willing to do anything God said. And he wasn't. And so God, in grace, bore with his failings and worked in his life again and again and again to the place where he was. And this is the way it is. Like, things don't look like, if you look out in the world right now, it does not look like the promises of God are going to come to pass. There's a lot of things we can look at and say, I don't know, this doesn't seem likely, that doesn't seem likely. Look, it rests on this foundation of grace. And God is patiently working these things out. Like, if I were to talk to someone maybe who's not your friend, maybe who's someone you've had some run-in with in the past, and I were to tell them, God said that this person is going to be just like Jesus Christ, they would laugh and say, impossible. Because let me tell you these 3 things that had happened, that they had done one time, or I heard this about them, or this or that. It'll never happen, but it will. Like, it rests on this foundation of grace. And this is so encouraging. This is the way it is in terms of the big plans, right? All that God has promised to do, and then also with you specifically in your own life. It depends on faith in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, like every one of them. That's wonderful. So again, you see this here. All we really see in this text is the sin of Jacob. Like, we see it very clear. And we see how much they're jeopardizing things. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, during this, when Jacob runs off, flees for his life, picture Isaac there at home, scratching his head, thinking, what went wrong? Like, how is this going to happen? I know I invoked these promises upon Jacob, but he's off there. He's not even in the land. And I know what kind of guy he is. He's terrible. And Esau wants nothing to do with any of it. I guess it's all for naught, right? He's got to believe, he's got to have faith, and the Scripture says he did, that God was going to do this. Right? He looks out at Jacob and he just says, and as he prays to the Lord, he says, God's going to save this boy. This man, this 77-year-old man, God's going to save him. My son's going to be saved. Because he has to be. He's going to come to know God. Just like my father did. Abraham, who didn't know God at all and didn't walk with God. God taught him. God's going to do that with Jacob. And God did do it with Jacob, as we'll see. So, that's all I have today. Again, we see these sins of Jacob very clearly, and it's a warning to us again to see how bad it gets. It's shocking, and yet it's because we know more of the whole story. It's wonderfully encouraging to think that, man, things can be that bad, and God can move in and save and change, bring repentance, because the whole thing rests on His grace. You know, at what point in this whole story we just say, well, now Jacob's gone too far. Like, it's just over. Enough's enough. Right? Be a lot of places. But God didn't do that. He chose him before he was even born. All right, well, are there any questions or comments on material today?